You're walking along the sun-bleached sands of Sudan's Red Sea coast in the early 1980s. The waves are calm. The sky is clear. And just off the shoreline, a group of Europeans in wetsuits is prepping for a scuba dive. Tourists, right, that's what it looks like. But beneath the surface of the water and the story, something way bigger is going on. This was not a real resort. It was a
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
front. A cover so elaborate, so convincing, that even local Sudanese authorities had no idea they were sharing coastline with an operation straight out of a Cold War spy thriller. Welcome to Operation Brothers, Mossad's covert mission to turn a fake beach paradise into an actual escape route for thousands of Ethiopian Jews fleeing brutal persecution. This story sounds like fiction, but it's not. It's one of the boldest and most surreal rescue operations ever pulled off. And yes, it involved real guests, real bookings, real scuba gear, and a whole lot of fake names, fake passports, and very real danger. In the late 1970s, Ethiopia was unraveling. The Jewish community known as Beta Israel was caught in a country descending into civil war, famine, and authoritarian rule. They were isolated, targeted, and increasingly desperate to escape. Their route out a harrowing overland trek into neighboring Sudan. And if that sounds dangerous, it absolutely was. Many didn't survive the journey. For those who made it across the border, the situation didn't get much better. They ended up stuck in refugee camps, surrounded by hostility and suspicion. The Ethiopian government didn't recognize their Jewish identity. Sudan wouldn't openly allow Israel to extract them. And for the Israeli government, getting them out wasn't just a priority, it was a moral obligation. But how do you pull off mass evacuations in a hostile region with no diplomatic ties and eyes everywhere? Enter Mossad. Israel's intelligence agency knew they couldn't rely on conventional methods. They already tried third country evacuations. Overland routes had collapsed. It was time for something radical. And someone at Mossad proposed the unthinkable. What if they bought an abandoned resort on the Sudanese coast, staffed it with agents posing as European diving instructors, and used it as a base to sneak people out by sea? Yet that actually happened. They found a site, an old, abandoned Italian-built resort on the Red Sea. It hadn't operated in years. Perfect. Mossad agents posing as Swiss businessmen set up a fake company, made up identities, printed false documents, and started moving in. They brought in diving gear, refurbished buildings, put out ads in European magazines. And shockingly, it worked. Tourists started coming. Actual tourists. From Europe. From Australia. Backpackers looking for sun and sea, who had absolutely no clue that their friendly scuba instructors were part of one of the most audacious covert ops in modern history. While guests lounged in hammocks or explored coral reefs, Mossad operatives were working night shifts, smuggling Ethiopian Jews from refugee camps to the beach, loading them onto Israeli naval vessels waiting offshore, and sending them to safety. This double life wasn't just risky, it was borderline insane. Sudan was an enemy state. If anyone had uncovered what was really going on, there would be been immediate arrests, possibly worse. Every movement, every piece of communication, had to be flawless. And Mossad wasn't playing around. They embedded agents with deep cover identities. Some had to live at the resort full-time, maintaining the illusion around the clock. Others operated in the camps, negotiating with smugglers, organizing convoys, and managing the chaotic logistics of evacuating hundreds of people with no paper trail. There was no margin for error. Boats had to arrive at precisely the right time. Lights on the beach were used as silent signals. Communications were encoded, relayed through secret channels, and coordinated between land, sea, and eventually, air. The entire operation functioned like clockwork except the stakes were human lives. But even clockwork breaks under pressure. As the operation scaled up, so did the risks. Word started to spread. Suspicion was creeping in. Sudanese authorities noticed that this strange little resort somehow was still running, despite being in the middle of nowhere with zero infrastructure. Why were these foreigners sticking around? Why did they keep to themselves, and why were they operating at night? Mossad had to escalate fast. They began running bigger missions, sometimes evacuating hundreds of people in a single wave. The goal was to stay ahead of discovery. The danger was real, and it was growing. More agents were brought in. Resources stretched. They were playing a game of espionage chicken, hoping the truth wouldn't catch up before the final boats left the shore. Eventually, the heat got too intense. Mossad was forced to abandon the resort and shift tactics. But the foundation they laid with Operation Brothers proved invaluable. It paved the way for larger, bolder rescue missions culminating in Operation Solomon in 1991, a massive airlift that evacuated over 14,000 Ethiopian Jews to Israel in just 36 hours. But that final airlift wouldn't have happened without the Red Sea diving resort. Because what Mossad pulled off wasn't just a clever bit of spycraft. It was a new blueprint for humanitarian rescue. They didn't just sneak people out, they did it while managing a real, functioning business in enemy territory. That level of commitment is wild. It's James Bond meets Airbnb with a moral compass. And yeah, it wasn't perfect. Secrecy took a toll. The stress of living double lives broke some operatives. The people they rescued had their own trauma, and the journey to integration in Israel came with its own set of challenges. But what Mossad accomplished in those years changed lives. It preserved traditions. It reunited families. It gave a future to people who had run out of options. It's easy to romanticize spy stories. But this wasn't about gadgets or glamour. It was about precision, grit, and an unwavering belief that even in the shadows, it's possible to do the right thing. Operation Brothers didn't just push the limits of espionage, it redefined them. It showed that intelligence work isn't just about secrets and sabotage. Sometimes, it's about saving lives. Quietly. Brilliantly. And with enough scuba gear to fool a nation. So if you thought spycraft was all tuxedos and martinis, think again. Sometimes, it's a wetsuit, a fake guest ledger, and a boat waiting in the dark. And now, we want to know what you think. Had you heard of this operation before? Do you think covered humanitarian missions like this could ever happen today? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this kind of wild, real-life drama is your thing, hit like, share with someone who needs to hear this story, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the chaos behind the headlines. Alright, so let us rewind just a bit because it's worth sitting with just how ridiculous this entire thing really was. You have Mossad agents sunbathing in deck chairs during the day, offering snorkeling lessons to actual tourists, and then sneaking through the desert under cover of night to meet terrified families in remote refugee camps. Like, how do you even train for that? 1 minute you're passing out towels, the next you're dodging military patrols with night vision goggles. The fact that this resort was ever operational is one thing. But the fact that it thrived, with glowing reviews from unsuspecting travelers, while being a front for one of the most high-stakes rescue missions of the decade, that's a level of multitasking that deserves a medal. Or maybe therapy. Because the danger wasn't abstract. The Sudanese regime was not just hostile to Israel, it had zero tolerance for any whiff of foreign interference. And this wasn't the type of place where you could charm your way out of suspicion. If they were caught, it wouldn't be a slap on the wrist. We're talking immediate arrest. Possibly worse. No diplomatic safety net. No hotline to Tel Aviv. They were completely on their own. So how did Mossad pull this off without the whole thing collapsing? Pure discipline. These weren't just operatives, they were actors, logisticians, engineers, doctors, smugglers, and rescue planners rolled into one. Every move was rehearsed. Every risk was calculated. Every identity had layers of backup. The fake resort had Swiss bank accounts, offshore business licenses, even tax filings. They had forged shipping receipts to import diving equipment. The front wasn't just believable, it was bulletproof. And because it was so convincing, the Sudanese government actually supported it. Not knowing, of course, that it was being used to smuggle refugees out of the country right under their noses. Sudanese officials even gave the resort positive press coverage. The agents made friends with locals, tipped generously, ran staff like any legit business would. They were so deep in character, even neighboring resorts, yes, there were a few thought they were just weird, rich Europeans playing James Bond in the desert. But things started to unravel the longer they stayed. Sudan's internal security forces were becoming increasingly suspicious not just of the resort, but of the growing number of foreign faces around certain refugee routes. Word was getting around that something strange was happening. Rumors about nighttime boats. About foreigners in jeeps showing up in camps and then disappearing. And Mossad knew it. That's when the urgency ramped up. The operation went from cautious, small-scale runs to increasingly daring mass extractions. There were missions where over 200 people were moved in a single night. Mothers, children, elders, some barely alive from starvation, were quietly loaded into trucks, driven through military checkpoints with bribes and fake documents, and rushed to the coast under total radio silence. Timing was everything. Boats couldn't wait. Convoys had to arrive within a precise window. Even moonlight had to be factored in. Too bright, and you risk being spotted. Too dark, and loading the boats became impossible. It was a logistical nightmare, coordinated from a pretend scuba shack on the beach. And here's the kicker: they pulled this off for years. Thousands of Ethiopian Jews were rescued under this program. Thousands. All while tourists sipped cocktails and posed for Polaroids in the same space where, hours later, desperate families were crouched in silence, waiting for the signal to run toward the waves. Eventually, the resort became too hot to operate. There were a few close calls, Sudanese intelligence sniffing around, patrols getting a little too curious, even a few arrests. Mossad had to shut it down. But by then, the operation had already made history. And yet, Operation Brothers was just the beginning. It became the foundation for future extractions, especially the massive airlifts that followed. Most famously, Operation Solomon in 1991, when Israeli aircraft evacuated over 14,000 Ethiopian Jews in just 2 days. It was the largest airlift of its kind, but it never would have been possible without the groundwork laid by the Red Sea Resort and the agents who risked everything. Because this wasn't just about escape, it was about survival. The Ethiopian Jewish community had lived in isolation for centuries. Their connection to mainstream Judaism had been severed long ago, but their identity remained intact. They practiced ancient customs, kept kosher without knowing the word for it, and passed down stories that traced their roots to biblical times. When they were rescued, they weren't just being relocated, they were returning to a homeland many of them had only ever heard about in whispers, and that's what makes this operation so unique. Most intelligence stories are about sabotage or subversion. This one was about preservation. About culture, family, tradition being saved, not destroyed. Mossad, often known for its lethal efficiency, was suddenly orchestrating humanitarian rescue missions under the nose of an enemy regime. It's also worth noting, this was all done without fanfare. For decades, the world didn't know the full scope of what had happened. Even within Israel, the agents who ran the resort remained anonymous. The rescued families had no idea who was behind it. For many, the memory was just a blur of fear and relief. That's the nature of clandestine operations. You get no credit, no headlines, no applause. Just the knowledge that it worked. But when the story did come out years later, it hit like a thunderclap. People couldn't believe it. A fake resort, real guests, thousands smuggled through beach tourism. It was so outrageous that Netflix eventually turned it into a movie. Though like most Hollywood versions, it missed half the nuance. Because the real story doesn't need dramatization. It was drama. It was survival. It was people putting their lives on the line, not for secrets, but for strangers. The moral of all this: sometimes, the best spy story isn't about what you destroy. It's about what you save. The Red Sea diving resort didn't just host fake tourists, it became a symbol of what's possible when creativity, conviction, and insane levels of risk come together with a purpose. It redefined espionage. It redefined what intelligence agencies could do. Not just kill missions or surveillance, but full-scale, moral operations that leave a lasting legacy. It also raised real questions about what governments are willing to do when the stakes are high. Mossad could have played it safe. They could have stuck to airlifts, or pressured international allies. But instead, they built a tourist trap in enemy territory, ran it like a business, and turned it into one of the most successful humanitarian ops of the 20th century. And they did it in board shorts and wetsuits. Let's be honest, stories like this are rare. They don't fit cleanly into the usual boxes of war, peace, politics, or ideology. They're messy. Complicated. They involve deception used in service of something good. And in a world where spy stories are usually about betrayal and lies, this one was about hope. A fake resort that led people home. You'd think that after all this, after years of playing secret agent in a swimsuit, faking guest bookings, dodging foreign patrols, and rescuing thousands of refugees, Mossad operatives would at least get some kind of recognition, right? Not even close. Most of the people involved in Operation Brothers stayed silent for decades. The resort forgotten. The files classified. The Ethiopian families they rescued moved to a new country with no idea who had orchestrated their journey through the shadows. That was the deal. No headlines, no medals. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing you pulled off the impossible. And when you really think about it, that's what makes the story hit so hard. It's not just the scale, it's the silence. Because this wasn't a big, flashy military mission. There were no tanks, no drones, no massive convoys rolling across borders. It was done with whispers. Disguises. Patience. The very tools that intelligence agencies are known for but almost never use for this kind of goal. And let's not sugarcoat it, this whole thing could have imploded so many times. Sudanese soldiers weren't exactly known for restraint. A single raid on the wrong night, a tourist asking the wrong question, a local staffer catching on any of that could have brought the entire operation crashing down. And it wouldn't have just exposed the agents. it would put the lives of thousands of Ethiopian Jews at risk. Families who had already fled famine, violence, and persecution. People who had lost relatives on the journey. People who were holding on to hope with both hands. That's why the stakes were so suffocating. Every successful extraction wasn't just a win, it was a miracle. And let's talk about the psychological toll for a second. Can you even imagine being one of those agents living in constant duality, smiling at guests while knowing you're about to risk your life after sunset, keeping the business running during the day while coordinating high-risk missions at night? It's not just physically exhausting, it's mentally disorienting. You're constantly switching roles. One moment, you're making sure the towels are clean. The next, you're calculating the fastest desert route to a secret pickup site. You're always acting. Always aware that one misstep, one cracked mask, could mean death. But they did it anyway. Because beneath all the strategy and spycraft was a deeply human mission: get people out. No matter what. These weren't faceless operatives chasing medals. They were people who believed in something. Who saw thousands of families stuck in limbo, treated like political pawns, and decided not on our watch. And that's why Operation Brothers still matters. It's easy to get cynical about the world. About governments. About espionage. But this story throws all of that into sharp contrast. It says, yes, spies lie. But sometimes they lie so people can live. They fake documents, forge business licenses, and run scuba resorts in enemy countries not to profit, but to rescue. The Red Sea diving resort wasn't just a location, it was a symbol. A mirage in the desert that turned out to be real. A lifeline hidden in plain sight. And to this day, it remains one of the most daring, absurd, and completely real rescue missions in modern history. So yeah, maybe history forgot it for a while. Maybe it didn't fit neatly into the narrative of war and diplomacy. But the people who were saved, they didn't forget. The agents who pulled it off, they never needed applause. They had something better. They had proof that even in the most hopeless places, even in the heart of enemy territory, it's possible to build something that saves lives. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let us know your thoughts. What surprised you most about this story? Would this kind of operation even be possible today? And if you're into wild, true stories like this one, spy ops, celebrity meltdowns, PR disasters, you know what to do. Hit that like button. Subscribe. And buckle up. Because we've got more chaos coming.